Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war sort of geopolitics video. I'm going to give you a bit of an update on what's going on with regard to the fallout from the telephone call the other day and between Trump and Putin and other things concerning negotiations between the nations. It's interesting to see some of the media reporting going on. Here is, actually this is a headline reporting on another headline. Trump refuses to support sanctions on Russia, seeking business deals with Putin. That's what the claim of a New York Times piece is. And then, in fact, a New York Times piece here saying Trump's new position on the war in Ukraine, not my problem. Not my problem, says no reports. That's Trump's new stance on the war in Ukraine per the New York Times. Following the call with Putin, he told Zelensky and EU leaders that Russia and Ukraine must find a solution on their own. Trump also backed out of supporting new tough sanctions on Russia, according to 6 officials. We hear from the Wall Street Journal that Zelensky's attempt to get Trump on his side falls flat. Ukraine's leader has agreed to almost everything President Trump wants, but the approach has brought him next to nothing. Kate from Kharkiv says it does fall flat, doesn't it? We did everything Trump and his administration asked of us, and yet there are no additional sanctions on Russia, no additional support for Ukraine. No pressure on Putin to end the war. It's a slow betrayal, dragged out just enough to keep anger at bay. I don't know. I don't find anger is being kept at bay. I find I'm more angry than ever. It seems a weird scenario where we're relying on Ben Shapiro to try and set the record straight for the Trump administration. So here is the right-wing influencer.
To unwind this. He just hopes to outlast. His goal is to outlast. So President Trump, after this very long phone call with Vladimir Putin, did not come away with any commitment by Putin to do anything. Okay, which of course is not a surprise. That's not Trump's fault. Vladimir Putin doesn't have an interest in actually negotiating an end to the war because he believes that if he just lasts long enough, the West will walk away from the war and he'll walk through Ukraine. That's what he's gambling on.
100%. 100%. He's got that right. And then when you see stuff like this from Senator Tommy Tuberville, big Trump supporter, huge Trump supporter, and one of the biggest, square brackets, insert swear word here, people I know. I don't know him, thankfully. We'll come to what Ben Hodges says about him in a second. This is Tommy Tuberville on Fox News. This is egregious.
But Vladimir Putin now is gone. He's to the point where he's taken so much land, he's making so much progress. Why would he make a deal? He has got the cards in his hand. Biden had the cards in his hand very early, but now we've lost all the cards. And Vladimir Putin is going to want a lot from the Ukrainians. He's going to want a lot in terms of land, the things that are going on there in terms of possibly even Odessa. He's going to want Crimea, but he's going to want NATO to stay away from his borders. Now, I can't blame him for that. 100%, we don't need to be on their borders, and he's asked that for years.
So that is Tommy Tuberville effectively aligning himself with Russian propaganda there. Is NATO on Russia's borders. I can't blame him. I can't blame him for wanting, to take Odessa, want NATO on their borders. Blah, 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 blah. Fred Wellman says, worshipping the dictator that is slaughtering hundreds of thousands. What a piece of stuff you are, Tommy Tuberville. You've always been one, even before you used your fake Veterans Foundation to buy a $60,000 truck for your branding, referencing some scandal with him. Now, Ben Hodges, former Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, says a US Senator, Tommy Tuberville, who has zero understanding of the actual war, the geography, why Ukrainians are fighting, why it's important for the US to support Ukraine, stunningly clueless, who is briefing him. Thoughts and prayers to Alabama voters. Yeah, so that's where we're at. So now we're also seeing the US not only not pressure Russia to align themselves, at least from a kind of presidential point of view, with Putin. Now we have seen this. Similar stuff has happened at the UN and at the G7 previously, where the Americans have tried to temper statements and make it look like Russia isn't so much at fault type thing. I find it entirely disgusting. But the US opposes a joint G7 statement on further support for Ukraine. Washington also refused to label Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine as illegal in the text, according to sources who spoke to Politico. This is horrendous. US objects to supporting Ukraine in G7 statement. The US is opposed to including further support for Ukraine in the G7 statement. So the US does not want to give further support to Ukraine, certainly from a G7 point of view. The US no longer wants to support Ukraine formally in any way. That's what I get. All they're doing is fulfilling contracts that are already out. So it doesn't want to give further support for Ukraine in a G7 statement that is being hashed out by the finance ministers in Canada. Washington is also reluctant to describe Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine as illegal in the text. Two officials involved with the negotiations told our colleague Grigoria Sorgi, who has a story. That's absolutely despicable. And we're hearing, Tim White said, seems to me that the Putin-Trump phone call lasted over 2 hours because there were so many orders handed down by the Kremlin. Andrei Yermak, the leader of the presidential office for Ukraine, said an important signal from the United States, a bipartisan group of senators. So I think it's going to be up to senators to try and do something about this because the Trump administration itself is not going to do that. So they've introduced a resolution that clearly states no peace agreement with Russia can be concluded without the return of all abducted Ukrainian children. So that's really good. What we want to see. This is US Senator Chuck Grassley, who is, pretty damn Republican. Putin has kidnapped thousands of children to brainwash and Russify them, to destroy their cultural heritage. This is a moral outrage. I introduce a bipartisan resolution today calling for the return of these children before a peace agreement is finalized. Excellent. That's what we want to see. Why can't we hear that kind of stuff from Trump himself? Oh, because Trump is essentially a pro-Putin mouthpiece. Sanctions against Russia in the energy sector can make Putin's ceasefire, Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys has said. He's pretty strong on stuff like this, Budrys. In an interview, he said that Europe, quote, has to stop importing at least liquefied natural gas, and cited the example of Lithuania as the first EU country to stop importing Russian LNG. Quote, because of the alternative coming from the US. It worked for us. We know that there are the extra export capacities in the US. We have to use those. And now it is the right time to do it for the US and the European Union to cooperate. So here's an opportunity for the US to get closer with the EU rather than bashing the EU with a stick. Start having closer ties in terms of energy exports to replace the Russian exports that still exist between the EU and Russia. Now, interesting to hear this. Russian gas will be multiplied by 0. The EU found a way to bypass the veto of Orban and Fico. So the two people that don't want to put sanctions on Russian gas because they still demand it, they consume it, and also they are friends of the Kremlin. The EU was struggling with unanimity in terms of applying regulation and policy to Russia. Now, the European Union intends to ban Russian gas with a quota set at 0. The measure, that way round of doing it, does not require unanimous approval within the bloc. So that could be good news. Thanks so much to fellow Yavi there for sending that to me. Now, how does the Russian media interpret all of this? Russia continues to celebrate the Putin-Trump call. Today's Russian papers, says Stacey Rosenberg, say this, quote, Trump's stance couldn't be more advantageous to Moscow. Quote, Trump is our ideological partner. Another paper tells European leaders, just breathe in the smell of the new world order. There's nothing else you take from this video. It is that Russia is saying that. Russia see Putin as a massive ally. If that is the case, Russia see Trump as a massive ally. If that is the case, then if you are still supportive of Trump, then you need to get your head checked. It seems that Washington has finally realized that none of the current conflicts can be resolved without the participation of the EU, according to Der Spiegel. The EU is going to deal a real blow with the 18th package. So they've just done the 17th package. That seems to be being enacted now. They've got an 18th one they're already working on that supposedly is going to be really, really harsh on the energy sector, among others. It could affect two key areas, energy resources and the financial market. And if the EU go hard on Russia there, that could be really useful. The UK seems to be wanting to want to ramp up pressure as well. David Lammy's been particularly strong as our foreign minister. In fact, I just saw him eviscerate the former Home Secretary for the Conservative Party when they were in government, Priti Patel, in the House of Commons over Gaza. It was exceptional. He took her to task massively. Anyway, Maria Zakharova, the minister spokeswoman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has explained Trump's actions. The situation in Ukraine he clearly articulated, which was provoked, unleashed, and in fact created by the previous US President Biden, needs to be resolved. I cannot say whether he feels America's responsibility for this. He said that this is his goal, to resolve the situation in Ukraine. That is why he is doing this. He is doing this in the interests of his country and his political campaign, his political career. So again, we have a public condoning of an advocacy for Trump by Russian media, by the Russian government. Trump might as well be a member of the State Duma. Underpinning the intense feeling of frustration in Ukraine is a fact that appears obvious to almost everyone except Trump, says the Kyiv Independent, that after 119 days, Putin has not made a single concession that suggests he truly is interested in peace. Not a single concession. Trump's whole disgusting life is now running PR for a Russian dictator, says Jay in Kiev. What's he reacting to? Well, this is Trump speaking.
You mentioned that you believe Putin wants peace, but he just attacked Ukraine yesterday. So what makes you think that he wants peace?
Well, he's in a war, you know. Nobody said don't. They're fighting, they're attacking each other, and people are dying all the time. He's in a war. He's fighting a war. Nobody said he was going to stop. I think, is it terrible? Yeah, it's terrible. I think it's terrible.
Can you wait?
It's just an afterthought. I think it's terrible, but he's in a war. You know, what are you going to do? He is gonna kill Ukrainians. I'm sorry, he's going to kill Ukrainians. He's in a war. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'll tell you what you can do, mate. I'll tell you what you can do. You can put sanctions on Russia right now. Right now, you can put sanctions on Russia to the hilt. You know, like you threatened to do before you were elected. You know, like you pledged as a campaign manifesto promise. If one side was to drag their feet in these negotiations, you would come down on them like a ton of bricks. Well, do you know what? You've been punishing Ukraine and they've done everything you've asked, and you have not put a single concession on Russia. This is despicable. Now, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, taken to task yesterday in this hearing, absolutely lambasted by people like Van Hollen and what's her name? Is it not Mary Kelly? Anyway, another senator, absolutely destroyed, I think. But anyway, this is something that I think he nailed.
And here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
And I think he's right there. However, the US can change that. The US can bring about actually a Ukrainian military success in Ukraine by giving Ukraine everything they need and slamming sanctions to the hilt on Russia. Now, Zelensky had to remind Trump that peace talks already were underway during his call with the EU leaders. Zelensky had to remind, says the Kyiv Independent, US President Trump, that negotiations with Russia were already underway after Trump announced to the EU leaders that the Kremlin's readiness for talks. So Trump came out and said, hey, I've spoken to Putin. He's ready for talks. The Kremlin are ready for talks. And Zelensky had to say, hang on, we're literally already involved with talks. We're just in Istanbul, by the way. The exchange reportedly took place during a phone call involving Trump, Zelensky, and the leaders of Germany, France, Italy, Finland, and the European Commission. It followed Trump's earlier call with President Putin, in which a Russian leader provided vague assurances about peace efforts, but again rejected a ceasefire in Ukraine. Trump told the leaders that Putin agreed to start direct negotiations on a ceasefire immediately, which led to a few seconds of puzzled silence during the call, Axios' source said. Zelensky then reminded Trump that Putin had previously agreed to this, and the first round of direct talks had already taken place in Istanbul, marking the first direct talks between Kyiv and Moscow since 2022. Trump did not directly respond, the sources said. The Ukrainian president and other leaders also pointed out to Trump that it had been his idea to start the peace talks with an immediate 30-day ceasefire. But of course, nothing has happened about that. Participants on the call reportedly seemed surprised that Trump was relatively content with what he heard from Putin, even though the Kremlin's position had not changed. Trump presented this as a new development in the negotiation process. When asked about potential sanctions against Russia, the US president, Freudian slip, said he did not think it was a good idea, adding that he believes Putin wants a deal. Trump told the group that Putin would present a peace memo with his terms for a ceasefire and to end to the war. We already know what he wants, and they are ridiculous demands. Trump is so freaking naive here, or he wants exactly what Russia wants. Now, Bloomberg have come out in a very, very interesting piece. Ukraine and Europe are on their own now. The US president has the means to pressure Putin on Ukraine and didn't. And now it's the old world's time to choose. So Bloomberg's article, summarized here by Max24, broadly says, amongst other things, now Ukraine and Europe are left alone. Trump did not fail in his attempt to stop the war, and this is that kind of point I made earlier and many of you have made. He simply never tried to do so. He didn't fail, he just didn't even try. And that could be an important distinction there. From the beginning, Trump sought to restart relations with Russia for the sake of economic benefits for the USA. Intervention in the war only prevented this. From the Russian point of view, everything turned out for the best. Putin put forward some vague new proposal to start direct negotiations with Ukraine and outlined his demands for in a memorandum. Now that Trump is out of the game, Putin has fewer reasons than ever to make concessions. Not only is he not made concessions, but he's not incentivized to make concessions anymore because Trump has essentially pulled out. Ukraine will have to give Russia not only the already occupied but also unconquered territories that Moscow has formally annexed, abandon any ties with NATO, and demobilize most of its armed forces. Zelensky's attempt to sway Trump to his side have failed. So that's kind of where we're at, and it's not good. Next direct Russia-Ukraine talks may include the US and EU, per European Commission spokeswoman Paula Pinho. After a Trump-Putin call, the US briefed European leaders agreeing on the need for talks with Ukraine involving Europe and America. And that's because, Europe have to be a part of them because of sanctions. And this is about Europe, isn't it? Anyway, back to a bit of Ben Shapiro, because why not?
Most of the European nations, and we're trying to get that whole thing wrapped up. What a shame that it ever started in the first place.
Okay, it's not just a shame that it got started in the first place. It is Vladimir Putin invading a sovereign country. Trump said.
And that's the point. It's a shame it started in the first place, and then goes on to blame Biden. Stop, Trump, with that. It is pathetic. Get on and give Vladimir Putin some hell. Give him hell. It is he that started this. Ugh. And then, in case you're wondering what message this is all sending to the rest of the world, mainland Chinese forces held an amphibious landing drill in the Taiwan Strait on Tuesday, according to SCMP, South China Morning Post. 73rd Group Army exercised tactics and skills of nearshore driving and landing operations with armoured amphibious vehicles on a beach on the southeast coast of the Fujian province. Yeah, gearing up to have a go at Taiwan, because look what the US does when other nations invade sovereign territories. The square root of naff all. It's despicable, and we're still there because Trump is weak. Still hasn't changed from yesterday, but just a few more things to add in. Let me know what you think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.